Steve, Toomey, thanks for coming on. I am really excited for a bunch of different reasons to have a long form conversation with you. This show is called I Have Some Questions. And if there's anything I've observed in the 30 some odd years I think I've known you, is that you are a master of asking questions. And whether you think so or not doesn't really matter. You are one of the biggest question askers that's ever influenced me. So I thought it'd be fun to start off with just a kind of a meta question. What makes for a good question?
Oh boy. Well, let me see if I can work into trying to answer that. I think the very first thing is, and you had mentioned it earlier, having curiosity. Actually, if I actually want to know, if I'm actually interested, then good questions seem to happen. If I'm not interested in either the person or the topic, I find it much more difficult to ask those questions. And so I think from that, part of that derives from, especially, let's talk about people. There are certain people that I don't find interesting. Mm-hmm. And so when they're speaking, I'm not fully listening. I'm not fully present. If I'm interested in the person and what they do and who they are, then I listen really well. And by listening really well, I just naturally have questions that will come on and help me understand who they are better, and even help me to understand what question to ask next. And it just kind of, from that point, I just have more and more questions because I'm trying to understand, and I'm interested in understanding.
I heard you say that it might just come down to your interest in the person. Is it almost always an interest in the person, not necessarily the topic that you're really interested in? Or do you find that there's a mix and match of like what they're talking about and who is doing the talking? What's that ratio like for you, do you think?
Well, it probably always is mix and match, but there are certain people that I find very interesting that are interested in things that I'm not interested in. Mostly they're interested in things that I'm interested in. Otherwise we wouldn't maybe have the relationship. But I can think of several individuals who are very interested in things that I have absolutely no interest in, and they love to go off on it.
Yeah.
And I just tune out and really, even in my own family, everybody in my family is really interested in plants, house plants, and can go in and just talk in detail. And I like having plants, but I don't know why we need to get down into the weeds, so to speak. I'm not interested. I go find something else to do.
Yeah, I can just hear you muttering, they're talking about plants again, and trying to find something else to do, because I also wouldn't find that very interesting. Okay, so if we were to start to concoct a recipe or a stew for what makes a good question, it sounds like one of the critical ingredients for you is asking the right person in the first place. Otherwise, it's difficult for you to care, even if the topic may be interesting. Do you ever find that you're interested in the topic but utterly uninterested in the individual talking about it? What's that dynamic like for you?
That's a great question. I'm not sure. Normally when that happens, because I guess that does happen, but it's this: I'm interested in the topic and the person is talking about it, but doesn't have any idea what they're talking about.
Yeah,
that's normally how that shows up. And which, in all fairness, I probably do that too. There are probably things that I'm interested in, and if I'm talking to somebody who's way advanced on that topic, and I start chattering away, maybe that answers why they get up and walk away when I'm in the middle of talking.
That could be at play. Yeah, to sprinkle a little humility dust over this conversation, we are both the same idiots in certain topics and maybe better in others that we may be commenting on. But that's the dynamic I've had as well. As I was thinking through, like, okay, I've got some topics I'm fascinated by, And some people I've observed, maybe I don't even know this about them ahead of time, but when they start talking, I'm like, man, I don't know that I really want to invest much in this because I'm not that invested in the individual for whatever reason. Maybe previous experience, maybe it's just the current conversation or whatever. But that is a difficult dynamic of like, man, I want to talk about this thing, but not with you. And
Right.
I think that's usually the framework for it is I happen to know a lot about this. That's why I'm excited about it. And I don't think we're going to have a mutually engaging conversation about this because of that.
Well, one of the things that I know myself well enough to know is the number one reason I have to ask questions is because that's how I learn. I don't learn very well in a classroom. I can learn by reading, depending on what it is, but I learn best with interaction. And and the topics that I normally like is I like meta narrative types of topics. The big picture and why do we do what we do. And I really love talking about the meaning of life, those types of things. I remember being at a party when our kids were in high school, and there was a bunch of parents around, and one of the parents started to talk to me about how he loves to work on his car and how there's just nothing better than lying underneath the car and just looking up at what he has to fix. And I think I thought he was insane. I had no idea that people actually enjoyed that kind of thing.
I have definitely thought that as my wife in her previous heart surgery career would tell me all about a surgery. And I was like, I can't fathom wanting to know all the things you're telling me, let alone being like happy about it while it's happening. So we're adding a few more things to our recipe, our stew here. It's got to be the right person. There has to be some relative level of interest in the individual. And it seems like there has to be some relevant overlap of interest in the topic and maybe some relevant context, like some comparable competence, is the word I was looking for. Like some relative competency around that topic. I probably won't be a fun conversationalist if you're the wizard on something and I don't know anything, and vice versa. So we've got to have, like, those pieces are built in. You made the comment, though, that you need to ask a lot of questions because that's how you learn. But it's also often, having known you as long as I have, it's often how you teach and often how you help other people learn through that. So learning isn't the only goal of asking these questions. Like, what are we trying to do? What's the purpose of asking these good questions, or what are some of the purposes of asking these questions?
Well, I'm glad you put it that way. The asking better questions to teach as well as to understand is, I think, is a real art form that it's one of the things that I would really like to get better at. A couple of years ago, Janine and I attended a week-long Lifelines course down in San Antonio, which was all about that idea, where we went through lots of exercises, and you had to develop an exercise with 5 or 6 people, develop some questions, sit down and debrief the exercise. And the whole thing was you had to keep asking questions. You can't offer your own opinion. And I got shut down. I don't know how many times. It was really, and the thing is nobody else was over 35.
Yeah, I think.
So we were well over twice as old as everybody else in there, which, I think we got a free hamburger or something like that. But that was so hard for me I could ask a couple of superficial questions, let's say, and then I was ready to offer my opinion on what needed to be done. And really, I had not asked enough questions to fully understand the situation so that the advice or the comment that I had actually was as relevant as possible to that specific situation. And I see myself do that all the time. I'm so anxious to chime in and give my opinion that I don't I find it very difficult to hang in there long enough to ask enough questions.
Yeah, and there does seem to be some amount of give and take that has to happen in a conversation like that. Otherwise, it feels like kind of an inquisition. You know,
Right.
if I'm just grilling you to get all the information I need to run my algorithm to give you an output that maximally is valuable for you, it's like, well, that doesn't really work super well for most.
Sure.
I think, I was thinking about this beforehand because I've never, literally prior to today, Steve, I've never asked myself, oh, running a podcast called I Have Some Questions, I've really never sat and dissected what makes a good question. I've never really tried to think through and put a framework or recipe together for it. It's just a thing that we do. I know what makes a good sales question. I know what makes a good discovery question
Right.
for the purpose of a specific outcome I'm trying to drive towards. But a generalization of like what makes for interesting questions. And one of the places I got stumped is like, well, what is the purpose of the question? Is it to learn something you didn't know before, right? Is it about information gathering? Is it about, using those questions to advance somebody else? Is there a giving intent there? And one of the things I kept coming back to is it seems like the best questions are the ones that keep the conversation going.
Right.
They prompt the other person to turn on their brain in a meaningful way they might not have otherwise, and then come back at you with some other thing too, right? And you create this ping pong match of a conversation where both advancing the ball, not trying to win. Those seem to be the best conversations that I have. But it can be really difficult in the moment to determine like, what is my intent here? And I know I suffer from this with my kids, with my wife, with clients, where I kind of lose the plot on why I'm asking the question in the first place, which I think is going back to what you were just saying. Maybe what you're saying you struggle with is like, I asked these questions so I could give value or something like that, as opposed to asking more. Is that what it feels like in the moment? Like you feel like you're trying to give an answer?
Well, I think that I think so much of it, what you're trying to do, you're trying to get into their head and out of your own head a little bit, because you can ask certain questions, let's say, of one person, that if you asked it of another person, it would be offensive, or they would be defensive or something like that. And so how you're, again, it depends on the topic. It depends, my wife, I just found this out. We've been married for over 40 years. And I just found this out maybe 2 years ago that I think I actually shared this with you before, that when she has something that she wants some input on, she's not asking me to fix it.
Hmm.
And if she is especially saying, well, this person over here acted this way, what I do is I naturally play devil's advocate. And I said, well, have you considered that they might have done this, they might have done that? And that, again, that's how I learn. I'm trying to get the whole context so that I can come up with a response that's going to be helpful. And, after almost 40 years, I found out that was not helpful. That it was, well, I feel like you're taking sides. You're taking the other side. And it's, well, how could you possibly think that? It doesn't matter if I didn't get it. That's how she took it.
Yeah.
And I never picked up on it. That's so frustrating.
Are there other arenas where like that's a fascinating, I think we've all lived through that to some degree with our partners, especially with our children too, where we're playing one game and that's not the game they were trying to invite us to play, and we're trying to win it, and that's just like we're so far off the mark, right? And maybe they've been extremely patient with us over 40 years, and maybe less so, and that became an issue sooner or something. I don't know. But in other arenas of life, that it plays out differently, right? Like you ran a successful real estate company, commercial real estate company, for a long time with a lot of really smart, capable people in it, with a lot of clients who are very smart and capable clients. How does that dynamic where you're asking these questions and playing devil's advocate, how does that adjust depending on whether they're a client, employee, spouse, or kid? Is there a different framework that may apply there?
Oh, I suppose there is. I also imagine that when you break it all down, it's all the same. You're trying to read the room. You're trying to say, okay, so you and I have a certain relationship. That has been built over the years. We know how to talk to each other. We know each other well enough how to talk to each other. We may or may not have serious issues that or counseling each other, but we understand each other. And how I'm going to talk to you is going to be different than I talk to anybody else. It's going to be different based on that relationship. And as long as, and I feel like I can do that well as long as I'm keeping the focus off of me. As long as I'm not making it about me, this is easy. But if for some reason I'm feeling threatened or whatever, then you kind of go into panic mode a little bit, and it's about you. It's not about them, and it's not a healthy conversation. Does that make sense?
It does. And it sounds like one of the pertinent questions to maybe ask ourselves as we get into those conversations is, who am I trying to serve right now? Like, what is the purpose of this line of inquiry? What outcome am I driving towards? What am I really trying to accomplish right now? And it's so easy to talk about this fully removed from it, right? It's easy to say to yourself in hindsight, while you're cooking dinner with your spouse on a Tuesday night, and she's just sharing a challenge she's had in her day with her, maybe the right thing to do in that moment isn't to try to solve the challenge for her, because we're in the kitchen processing our lives together, not in the boardroom trying to put a solution on the whiteboard. It's easy to see in hindsight, but it's really freaking difficult to remember that in the specific moments. And I wonder, what are some of the things that have what are some of the questions you've asked yourself, or some of the tips or tricks that have worked for you to get better at that over the years? You admit you're not perfect at it yet. None of us are, but how have you started to train yourself and identify who you're trying to serve in a particular conversation?
Well, I think a lot of it is finding ways to be mindful. I find a tremendous amount of hope in the words of Jesus in the Bible, because he's pretty emphatic that it needs to be about others, not about you, and all that means. I sent you earlier the prayer of St. Francis. And so that is something that's been meaningful to me for several years. It's called, Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. So there's a couple of different things there. One is, it is a cry for help, realizing that you can't do it yourself. So it's a prayer asking for some pretty special outside assistance, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's pretty important. There's a lot of stuff that we really, or who we want to be, is very challenging. And I find it very difficult to just think that I can do it all by myself. I need you. I need my wife. I need my family. I need everybody around. And then sometimes often I need God's help. Because I'm that screwed up. And I'm not trying to be facetious about that. There's a certain bar that I'd like to try to be aiming for, and it feels a long way off sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you could interpret that a handful of different ways. The bar itself, that is, right? And there's absolutely an element where somebody may set that bar based on faith, whatever their particular faith is, and whatever that bar has been established by their faith. You could also look at it from just a philosophical perspective. Like, it's easy to think about Jordan Peterson just saying life is really hard, or Nietzsche saying life is it's filled with misery and suffering and hardship, and being better amidst that context is just a hell of a goal. Like, why wouldn't we want to be better in this place? And that prayer you sent is a good example of a couple specific ways to try to be better. Instead of trying to be understood, try to understand. Instead of needing consolation, try to be the person offering consolation. Instead of needing love, try to provide love. Instead of doubting, try to provide faith. It's not that those other things aren't real too, but the prayer is about asking for the strength to be that for other people, it seems like, to arm me with what I need to go out and do good in these various ways that St. Francis articulated. That's how I interpret it.
Well, and that's spot on. And if you had a chance to, I don't know if you had a chance to read the essay by Alan Patton.
Yeah, I really like that.
But he talks
in the show notes too.
That's exactly what he talks about, is by reading that prayer, by trying to live it out, it gives him purpose in a world that all of a sudden the world becomes less mean, less nasty, less hard, and all those things, because I now have a mission. And the mission's bigger than making money or, building a company necessarily and everything else, but to actually be a peacemaker, to actually be, especially in today's world where, just in this country, there's so much divisiveness and people are just, families are breaking up and everything else for reasons that make really very little sense. I think the world needs people to say this, this is who I want to be.
Well, that can feel like such a massive undertaking. Like if you were to just go, again, we'll share these in the show notes for anybody, these two links that Steve shared with me ahead of time for a conversation. If you were to just read that, be like, wow, that's a massive undertaking. Like to really adopt the perspective of, I want to internalize that my goal is to bring good into the world in these specific ways, can feel like an enormous burden. And at the same time, if you were to just boil it down to any one of those words and any one of those specific things, that moment where you actually do that, it's probably just a conversation. It's probably one thing at a time. It's one moment, one meeting, one interaction, coffee, jog, whatever it is at a time. It's like, it's simultaneously this juxtaposition of massive calling and at the same time, hyper simplicity. Just be good for that person in this world. That's all you have to do right now.
So that's an interesting segue, Erik. One of the other books that has really lit a fire for me over the last 2 years has been a book called To Change the World. And it's basically an analysis, first and foremost, of the divisions within the church. But it's way bigger than that. Because he's providing this context that on the extremes of things, you may not make any progress changing anything, but in the middle, that's where change can happen. And so it's important to understand that every side has valid points, right? And so this guy does a great job of bringing all these valid points up and saying, okay, so let's just kind of analyze that. But it's a pretty deep read, but it's really, really valuable as far as having that idea of how do we quit being so divisive? But in the end, it's about culture change is what he's trying to address. And he's bringing out that people think they can go out there and change culture by creating new laws, electing new people, all these different things, and that it can happen in a relatively short period of time. And this guy's he's been a sociologist for 40 years, and he's basically saying culture takes a long time to change. You can't change it overnight, and you sure can't change it by just creating new laws or electing the next person, which is where everybody seems to be focused on making the change. The change happens very slowly, and it happens within your sphere of influence, let's say. And just can you identify what you can get your arms around, that group of people, your sphere of influence, and can you be that for them? And then see how that spreads out. And again, you may not even live to see if there's any change at all. It's going to be very subtle and everything else. But it seems painfully obvious that that's the right thing to do. And he coined a simple phrase. He talks about faithful presence. Just be faithfully present in the lives of those around you through thick and thin, not just in the easy times, but the people who have challenges in your life, be faithfully present. You don't need to fix everything. Just be present.
That sounds like an interesting book. I mean, the subtitle to it is The Irony, Tragedy, and Possibility of Christianity. So even that gives an
Right.
indication that we're gonna pull to the surface some of the unsaid things or criticisms or challenges and actually digest them for what they are, which is probably challenging to do and also probably really valuable. Going back, I mean, your point is be faithfully present. And that going back to that prayer, it's just describing the ways in which you might need to be present in those moments. You may need to be the shoulder that's cried on. You may need to be the one who just listens and seeks to understand. You may need to be the provider of hope that there is something on the other side of the situation. So again, really broad thing. Just be present. No big deal. We all struggle with that every day. And that prayer of St. Francis is like, yeah, but these are all the specific ways you may need to show up in order to be present. One of the interesting things that I love that we're staring into faith for a bunch of different reasons, because if there's ever a place that spawns so many questions, it's absolutely any faith, Christianity specifically for our purposes. But that concept of just be present, so many, like we can look at America today, the West today, fraught with anxiety, with loneliness. We can talk about pandemic of male loneliness. We can talk about anxiety, depression for teenagers. Like there's so many things that we look at as this general psychological malaise. And the recipe seems to continually be to turn outward. People who ruminate and turn inward, and my life is hard, difficult, I've struggled with all these things, not to be dismissive of any of those. The recipe almost invariably ends up including some element of go do good for somebody else. Take the eye off of you. And going back to Jesus or this prayer of St. Francis, that sure seems to be the recipe they're prescribing as well. Is that you're not really the main character. Don't worry about that. Like if you go give into the world, like good stuff's going to happen for you. And yet that's incredibly difficult to do. What are some of the bigger questions you've had to wrestle with that tension of, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm on board theologically. I'm on board practically. It does make sense. Every time I do good in the world, I do feel better about myself. Like, what is some of the wisdom maybe you shared with that group down in Texas about how to tangibly do that? Because it's a hell of a lot easier to talk about than it is to like do in the moment. Can you share with us about what's worked for you?
Well, it's hard to say because for the most part, I feel like I fail at it. I'm way too, when it gets right down to it, and I only find this out the more I try to do these things, and I find out how selfish I am because of how this ought to be easy. If I could just not be so selfish, this would be easy. And then I find out, well, yeah, if I wasn't so selfish, but I am. I mean, some of this, when you enter into this, you kind of expose yourself to yourself a little bit, which is a bit frustrating. But I think that one of the things that I've learned over time is that it's really difficult to care for at least difficult people if you don't know their story. And if you can ask questions or if you can have a desire, take time to ask questions and actually listen and understand somebody's story, it makes it a lot easier to be patient, to be kind. If you don't know it's like you can walk around in a downtown area and look at a homeless person. And so all these things just come into your head, especially if that person is really kind of disturbed or being kind of rude, whatever kind of behavior they're emitting. You don't know their story. They're not really a real person to you. They're just not. And yet, if you take time to talk to one of those people and get to know them, whether it's in a homeless shelter or in a recovery center or something like that, and you find out this actually, there's a human being in there that has had life happen to them, and it makes it easier to be compassionate. At least that's what I think.
I think you're right. It's very easy to look at anybody from afar and we don't humanize them well. Right? And it's actually really easy to make a bunch of negative assumptions about them to justify our own current perspective on them, whatever it might be. It might be optimistic, might be pessimistic, but we're pretty good at constructing that narrative in our mind about who that person is without knowing anything about them. And the effort it takes to go get to know them is itself a barrier to entry.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's physical in the sense that you got to walk over to that homeless encampment and you've never done that before. And that's quite intimidating. And where do I actually park in order to do that? And that's weird. I don't want to think about it. So I'm going to go do something else. Like you could just stop there, let alone what words am I going to say? How am I going to not come across? Like we can spin this thing up really big in our heads. How do you summon the courage and just the conviction to care enough, to have enough battery pack to push through the initial resistance to getting to know somebody you might otherwise not? Maybe it's someone homeless. Maybe it's that person across it from you at church you don't really like that much because for whatever reason. Maybe it's a parent that's got a kid on the same soccer team as your kid. Like, how do you do that?
Well, I guess I can recount a few experiences, but there are so many people out there that are so stinking good at this, have so much courage and just are and maybe they're overflowing with compassion because they have been doing it for a while. And I think some people are just more naturally gifted perhaps, but I think first of all, we've got to get more used to stepping outside our comfort zone and being willing to challenge ourselves. And not just on this, but just in general. The first conversation I had with a homeless person was years and years ago, before Bethlehem Inn really had a place. And in Bend, the churches during the cold months, that you basically rotated between the churches for like 2 weeks at a time, and people slept there overnight and then took off in the morning. But the thing is they would recruit from within the church. You became the people that basically sat with these folks. And I remember one night we were all sitting around. We were playing some sort of a board game, and we'd been playing it for like 3 hours. And then my shift ended. Our shift ended. So a couple of us got up to leave from the table like that. And a couple of homeless guys just, "Oh, you're leaving? You're not part of the game?" Yeah, it was probably my wonderful wardrobe or something that won them over, But what we found ourselves doing is, while we were playing the board game, we're laughing and we're joking and we're getting competitive, and all the barriers just kind of came off.
Mm.
And you got to hear their stories. And again, hearing the story, and I won't, unless you want me to, I won't go into it any of them. But once you hear the story, the thing that you realize is that the line between them and us is much thinner than you think. All we needed was a couple of things to not go right in our life, and we could have been right. It's certainly true for me. All I needed was just one thing not to have gone right, one bad night, whatever. And I would have been right there. I have no business thinking I'm any better than it.
Mm.
And I think that goes a long way to making it easier to approach people.
You said a couple things there that I think are interesting. One, the mechanism by which you bonded was through the mutual struggle of a game. We being people, we tend to bond a lot better with people when we're going in the same direction with them. Whether you're walking alongside somebody, ever notice that? It's easier to walk and talk with somebody than it might be to sit and talk with somebody.
Sure.
Whether you're driving, right? The conversations that happen on a road trip are unlike any conversation you can facilitate in your own home or coffee shop.
Absolutely.
It's just impossible. And things like mutual struggle, whether it's climbing, hiking, playing a game where I'm trying to beat you or we're trying to beat them, working out, whatever it is, it seems to be a real bond. And so I guess one tactic, going back to the question of like, how do you do that? Well, if you don't know how to strike up the conversation, if you don't know how to begin, you might just try to put yourself in a position where you're going the same direction as somebody that you are aspiring to get to know better. And it'll probably inevitably happen. Staying
Well, and
near,
sometimes that requires changing your own course and walking their course for a while.
that's a great point. They may not be going where you're going, and you may be voluntarily acknowledging, I'm just going to march in the direction they're going. And that would be probably a great mechanism to switch on the ability to have those conversations without really having to think about it.
Yeah, I worked with Teen Challenge for a number of years, and I still remember the first time I sat in on a meeting with these guys, and there was somebody up leading a meeting, and I sat in the back, and I ended up sitting next to this guy who he was pretty rough looking and pretty surly, and the instructor, the guy who was teaching up at the front, was asking the group questions, and different people were answering and everything else. And so, me not knowing any better, I kind of jabbed this guy in the arm and, hey, I'll bet you got an answer for this. I'll bet you get an answer. And he looked at me like just cold. No, I don't. And, oh, okay, well, that didn't go well. But I came back, and every time I'd sit next to this guy, and I kept doing that. And after a while, he looked at me and he said, look, I barely graduated from 8th grade. And I was in Folsom Prison for 15 years. From the time I was 18 years old, he'd been in knife fights. He'd been in, over time, he told me the story about how his dad, when he was 7 years old, punched him in the face, knocked out his teeth. And so I kept sitting with him and sharing with him that, okay, so after this guy gets done talking, why don't you tell me what you understood and didn't understand? And then we would have a conversation after that. And there's a much longer story there, but he and I actually became pretty tight. We had him over to our house, and he was a guy that'd make you nervous. But what you see over time is you see who God actually made this man to be. He's not just some story, some criminal or whatever else. I mean, on the surface, he's got all this stuff, all this baggage, but deep down, he's just like us.
I love your point that if you were to look back at your life, you might be able to acknowledge a couple of breaks that went the fortunate way that didn't have to go that way. And that it's not that hard to see how a couple bad breaks, potentially in a row, or really bad breaks, could put you in a situation to make the same decisions that somebody you're sitting next to did make. I don't think that's hard in my life either to look back at and acknowledge. I want to draw on two things from that story you just shared. One, you have a particular knack for being very comfortable ribbing other people and softening them up over time with just consistent, like you have this way of bugging somebody to the point where they will, fine, I'll play with this guy, I'll talk to you, I'll answer, I'll participate. And that takes a particular amount of gumption and commitment. And like, where'd you get that? Where does that willingness to put it on the edge and be uncomfortable in a way that's got a slight smirk to it, so someone knows you're messing with them and seeking positive things, not bullying them? Where does that come from in you? You just do it instinctively, at least as long as I've known you.
I couldn't tell you. What I have been told is that I'm able to say things to people that nobody else can get away with. And I don't know why that is. I think the only thing that one thing that I come up with is I don't think I'm threatening to people. And what I mean by that is I'm just thinking of Compass. There were guys that were probably a little bit more imposing in and just their persona, and not in a bad way at all, but just I don't think I guess I just don't think that I'm threatening to anybody, and so it's easier for me to go in and just put people at ease sometimes.
So that would be the effect you have on them, which is maybe true, maybe not, but nobody would know better than you whether that's true. So that's probably as close to it as we're going to get. But inside of you, it takes a particular amount of willpower to acknowledge the game you're playing when you're like, I'm going to go sit back next to that guy again next week and ask him the same question and do it again and do it again. Like there's an internal lever you have to flip, I guess, for somebody to be willing to mentally know I'm committed to that now, and that's what I'm going to do. And it's going to be uncomfortable, and I'm just signing up for the discomfort of that. Like, what is that like internally when you make that decision to go back to sit next to that guy or some situation like it?
So I haven't really thought about this before. So I'm making this up, but I would say that I don't do that with people who don't need it. And by that, I mean people that are really, really confident or very full of themselves, like, I don't know, somebody that's very, very successful. I'm not likely to do that, at least not out of the gate, right? Not until I really got to know them. But like in the situation at Teen Challenge, that's what I'm there for. And I feel like I felt like I had something that I could offer them. I didn't necessarily know what it was, but that's why I'm there, because I felt like I had something to offer, and I wasn't going to get there sitting on the sidelines. And so, and again, we all have different personalities, right? Different strengths and gifts. And I have never been able to, I've always struggled trying to identify what my gifting was, because constantly everybody around me had way more concrete gifts than I did. And it wasn't until like 2 years before I retired that I recognized what I do well. And that was really interesting. That was just really interesting. I wish I would have discovered that, and because it gives you confidence if you know this is my arena, this is what I do well. It gives you confidence to jump into that and embrace it and not worry about the things you don't do well. I wish I would have discovered that much, much earlier.
I think that gap, that awareness of what you do well, whether we choose to think of it as gifting, whether you choose to think of it as just something you're naturally good at, talent, whatever, that gap in belief in yourself, I think, is one of the key limiting factors most people have. When we go back to depression, anxiety, turning inward as the malaise, the gap between doing something and turning outward and offering hope or love or consolation or whatever to someone else is a function of not thinking you actually have something to offer. You don't have anything to give, or being unaware of it, right? Less aware of it, or less confident in, yeah, I'm not actually good at that thing.
Mm-hmm.
You went through a process of learning about that. It sounds like later in your career, but there's no way you weren't already doing it along the way. Like your personality, your conviction to give has been strong for a long time. So you were doing it long before you were aware that that was a gift or something you were actually good at.
Well, yeah, I mean, well, we all find a way to struggle and move forward, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean you're fully engaged in it and recognizing and everything else. So it's not like I was totally unaware, but I wasn't very aware. what drew it out for me was we had the company go through strength finders. And primarily we started out with the partners because the older partners, we were all starting to talk about retiring and we needed to bring new guys in. And so we wanted to know what strengths are going to be leaving and which strengths do we need to recruit for as far as new partners and that type of thing. And so we had 8 partners at the time and we got the results back. And what I discovered, what I saw in the results was that I had they just focused on the top 5. And I had 3 that nobody else had. And the other 2, just a couple of people had. And most people were loaded up in this other area. And you know how I took it? No wonder I'm the dumbest person in the room. Because this is where you should be. You should be with all. And I mentioned that to my co-founding partner. And he looked at me like I was the biggest idiot in the room. And he said, how can you not know that that's why you have value, because you think different than everybody else? How can you not know that after all these years? I didn't. I just never saw that. All I saw was I'm in the room with a lot of really smart people. That's really all I saw. Some of the reason is all these guys graduated from high school, MBAs, everything else. They all graduate from college, right? So MBAs and everything else. I barely graduated from high school and got kicked out of the Air Force. So what do I really have to offer? I'm basically a fake.
Which is so fascinating in your story, your situation here, where you've built a successful company, you have a thoughtful business partner who validates you after you both decide we should invest in this inward-looking tool so that we can learn more about ourselves for all these purposes. You had all this context around how you discovered this, and it was still really hard to hear. No wonder we all struggle with understanding how we can provide value, right? Even in that circumstance where you have the best intentioned, most aligned individual you could have helping you shine a light on it, it's still hard to understand the value you bring into the world.
Right.
No wonder people struggle to figure out how to go contribute.
Well, and part of it is the world has just, a few generally accepted, here's what makes you smart. Here's what makes you a contributor. And most of it is more concrete than, well, some things are more concrete than others. Some are just, if you're a really good musician, well, you see that's your gift. And other things like that, those are easier to see. Somebody who decides to become a doctor when they're 7 years old and goes through all the schooling and everything else. Obviously, it's pretty easy to see how this person provides value. For a lot of us, it doesn't mean it's a lesser value at all. It's just that I'm not sure that we spend much time thinking about what those things are and what they look like.
It seems to me like that would be one of the reasons why the church family, the places you've gone around the world, have been such a consistent thing for you, because that's an environment where you can bring an enormous amount of value in a way that doesn't have anything to do with the piece of paper you got from Harvard or how successful your business is. It sure seems like a place you've found where you can consistently provide value to the world, which, again, just going back to psychology, is like one of the best ways to make yourself feel good about yourself. It's one of the best ways to not get caught up in anxiety, depression, despair, all these things. Has that been the role, or one of the roles? I don't want to peg it as the only, but is that accurate to say that that's an arena where it was easier for you to feel validated in the value that you gave to the world?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know. I have these conversations in my head periodically, and if I could just come to a resolution, I wouldn't have to have the conversations anymore. But part of it is a major part of it is you go where you're needed, I think, and where you're wanted. right? So when I retired, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be involved where I was needed. And I didn't really feel like I was needed in commercial real estate. There were plenty of guys that were a lot brighter, a lot better salesmen and everything else. If I leave, nobody's going to suffer.
Hmm.
My clients aren't going to suffer because there's other people that can pick up the slack very easily and probably better. So where can I go where I'm needed? Well, it's maybe places where the really smart people aren't willing to go. I don't know, Eric. I mean, I legitimately don't know. I just this is I tried to adopt this attitude of just, God open up a door, I'll go no matter where it is. And I got to do that. There's some doors that opened up where I got to meet really, really special, interesting people, develop relationships with them in and with and there's no fanfare. These aren't famous people or anything else. They're people just in some part of the world trying to do something special in their little environment. And for whatever reason, I can develop a relationship with them, and there's something that I can help out with. I can't. I really don't know it any better than that.
Well, from the outside looking in, it's obviously been a consistently compelling thing to do. You've consistently found problems you want to solve and areas you want to apply yourself, and that you perceive to need it along the way. I had a conversation it was a couple weeks ago with a guy named Bruce Vojak. And Bruce is a researcher by trade and author of these 2 books that are all about innovation in mature industries. And he's just like spent his whole career focused on how the heck do well-established companies, organizations stay innovative? What's the recipe inside of a company that's mature in its marketplace, right? How does Johnson & Johnson or General Electric continue to build and cultivate innovation when they've just been printing money in all these different ways? Why? That's obviously not a thing anymore. And one of the really simple truisms he shared that I thought was super fascinating is a piece of wisdom that was given to him early in his career, which was like, pick something you know a little bit about and you're kind of curious about, and just go do that. And that combined with what you're sharing makes me feel even more so that it's not about some grand light shining on your purpose. You might have that, but I think very few people really have the ultra clear 8K definition version of their calling or their need or value. I think most of the time it's probably more approximating Bruce's definition of like, yeah, something you're kind of curious about, where you're kind of interested. Go chase that to the end of the world. And that kind of aligns, I guess, with maybe what you were sharing.
Well, yeah, and I think part of it too is stop comparing yourself to everybody else. That was really important to me because I my partner was probably the best commercial real estate broker in the state anyway, and was rewarded for it. He was just really, really good. I sat by him desk to desk for years, and every year, just it was not something that ever came between us or anything else, but I always felt just a little bit less than, because I can't get that organized. I don't speak as well as that. I don't, all these different things that I would pick on myself. And as the company grew, and as I was making just a fine living, it finally dawned on me that I was acting a little bit like, let's say that I was the starting second baseman for the Yankees, and I was ticked off because Derek Jeter was getting paid more money and more attention and everything else. And so now I'm ticked off because I'm not Derek Jeter, but I'm on the flipping New York Yankees and everything else. That makes no sense whatsoever. So So that once I was able to start thinking that way a little bit, it is, hey, be be happy with who you are. Try to improve, certainly, but don't try to be somebody else.
Yeah.
I will never be that organized person that just has that's highly disciplined and it's. I'm not wired that way. I can't do that.
Well, and you going back to strength finders or any sort of assessment tool, it literally might be inaccessible to you to do that. It's like we've done an enormous amount of that, like investing in the understanding of ourselves over here, and my wife and I especially. And one of the tools we like is called CVI. It's Core Values Index, and it's a very simple look at like the core motivations that really drive what you do. Anybody can do anything, but how freaking hard is it for you? How much energy does it suck out of you to do that? And there's one particular quadrant. There's just the scale goes from like 0 to like 33 or something along those lines is your score in each one of those. And so when you're really good at something, you're like 26, 27 or more in those areas. One of those categories, I'm a 3 in my score. The ability for me to care about like storing knowledge and organizing things and like it is literally inaccessible for me. It breaks my brain every time I have to try to care about those things. And again, anybody can do anything. And when you run a business, you kind of have to care about some of that stuff. But the amount of energy it drains out of me to do those types of tasks is such that like I'll never do it if I don't have to. And I can just imagine you sitting next to your partner there and seeing those strengths shine and acknowledging at some point that those are just off the table for me. It's just not in the arena. But I've got all these other things that are off the table for him. Right. I think that paradigm change is the hard one. And again, you had a lens sitting desk by desk with this other individual. People my age and younger today, we don't necessarily have that. We have social media, Twitter. We have all of these other ways that are not authentic representations of the things we're comparing ourselves to. And there's just like, I compare the worst of myself to what somebody put on Instagram, which is obviously the 7th video iteration of the best of them.
Right.
That gap of perception is just massive, I think, for most people right now. And I think it's why people find it hard to contribute and feel like their ability to go drive change or do any of the things in the prayer of St. Francis is further away than it really might need to be.
Well, yeah, and it's compounded by, I don't know if you remember Ben Sass, who was, I think, a senator from Nebraska. And several years ago, he wrote a book called Them, Why Do We Hate Each Other? And How Do We Heal? And I mean, he was somewhat of a tech guy and wasn't saying that all tech is bad or anything else, but he was pointing out, I think, relatively early what the challenges are where we just don't know each other anymore. And talking about how it used to be everybody would go down to the high school football game, right? And so no matter, you might have different politics and everything else, but for that moment, you're all rooting for the same team and you're all part of the same community. And so you might disagree, but you're not going to hate them. And now we don't do that so much. Sure. And he even brought up at that point, he said, there's only 2 other guys in the Senate that not only there's only 2 other guys that even know somebody else who has a pickup truck. That's what he said. Because not that they have one, even know anybody.
Yeah.
And they're pretending like they know what the country's all about and everything else. And he's going, he brought up some things like that. Really interesting book on that level. And, my favorite part of our company was coming in the morning and face to face, having all the warm bodies and having that culture of camaraderie. And that was, I have a fairly short attention span. So I would make my phone calls, and I don't know, maybe it's an hour where I can just intensely focus and everything else. And then I would get up and I would just start going. We had open cubicles and I would just wander around the desk and I would just give people a bad time, whether they wanted it or not. It was like, I need to get this out of my system. Okay, it's been 5 minutes. Now I've totally disrupted the whole office. It's time for me to go back to work, And, even had these like Three Stooges heads that I would throw across the thing and just throw it against the blinds and scare the snot out of people. It's just like how anybody can work where they're just working online. They're not with a bunch of people. I really don't get it. I would die. I would die. I would not be able to do that because I loved coming in with all the guys, and we got along great. There was a great atmosphere. I like that. I mean, I would almost do that for free.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think the vast majority of people, we really do need to be around other people often. And I say vast majority because I'll throw the asterisks out there and allow for there are absolutely folks who all they want to do is sit and type into their computer screen, and they chose hopefully professions that let them do that, right? Coding, engineering, something along those lines. And there's great jobs that exist for that. And I suspect at some point they want to see another human somehow. Like, there's very few people that don't want any social interaction. And if we go back to what we were talking about earlier, striving in the same direction as other people is what creates a bond.
And I would suggest that there are a lot of people now that don't want to be around other people, but that doesn't mean that they don't need it.
Ooh, good point. That's a really good point. And that's actually something I'm concerned about, right? Like the real explosion in remote work happened with COVID as a catalyst for it. It was happening beforehand, but it obviously exploded over the last 6 years. And so that means that the vast majority of people in the workforce are not remote work native. They might have adopted it, they've tried it out, and they found that they like it or don't like it, but most people in the workforce, unless you entered the workforce in the last 5 years, which obviously a lot of people did, but most didn't, you only knew the social side of it first. You get to make an informed decision, therefore, on whether you want Steve throwing weird heads at blinds to mess with you, or you're like, F that noise, I would prefer to not go in.
Right.
Or anywhere in between, right? And that's a struggle people are having. But I do worry about an incoming generation, a workforce that from here forward enters the work world and all that they interface with is Zoom. And they don't have any instigator in their world that says, yeah, let's go play one more game of ping pong before we make more calls. Or yeah, let's get another cup of coffee. Or hey, dude, I see your eyeballs and you're struggling today. Like, let's go for a walk. Like, there's a lot of different ways this manifests where the human to human connection is really powerful. And I don't see it getting better in the short term because of more Zoom calls. But I think people are somewhat waking up to that. I think there's a lot of people who are trying to figure out a different way, whether it's their company making them or they're going, I need something other than looking at this screen. I have some hope that will reemerge.
Well, I sure hope so, because there's so much that gets lost. I mean, in addition to the basic camaraderie, there's no better way to learn. And especially if you were a newer broker, it was all open cubicles. You could just sit there and listen to guys that have been doing it for years, negotiating over the phone, solving problems on the phone, or getting after it, making some cold calls and everything else, and there was just an energy to it, and you could absorb far more about what was going on in the market across, because you could listen to guys' conversations all the time. And we did have small conference rooms. If you needed to have a quiet time or a private conversation, you could do that. But for the most part, you're out there in front of God and everybody.
Yeah.
And sometimes you get into a hard conversation and maybe not do that well, and somebody would stand up and say, you want some advice? And you get it. I mean, right there on the spot. And you might say, well, take a hike.
Sure.
Okay, that's fair enough. But you had people around that were willing to help you all the time.
Yeah.
And now we have, before I left, I remember having negotiating deals with brokers in other offices where they absolutely refused to meet. You could be in a very challenging negotiation that had not, where emails and phone calls had not moved anything forward. And you'd say, okay, we need to meet face to face and see if we can work this out. No, I'm not going to do that. I'm not willing to do that. I will let the deal fail before I will meet with you face to face. That just blew my mind.
Yeah, that is wild. That isolation, I think, drives so many parallels to your story of the senator that only knows two other people that know someone who has a pickup truck. It's just so easy to assume so many things about the individuals and intent and character, and especially negotiating a deal, right? Like, if it's good for them, it must be bad for me is an easy thing for someone to revert to. And it's not anywhere near true necessarily. But if I don't know you and you're them, pretty tough to tell otherwise. Your book, Them, made me think of, I read a few years ago, Jonathan Haidt's book, The Righteous Mind. And it's the subtitle to it is something along the lines of Why Good People Disagree About Politics and Religion.
Oh, interesting.
And it's a really fascinating book, and he dives deep into really understanding the core values people operate on. And the core thesis of the whole book is that every single one of us operates on the same values. We just stack rank them differently. And we prioritize them in a different order than the other people, right? There's almost no one alive who would say, I hope the homeless people freeze tomorrow. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's not like somebody doesn't care about those individuals. Now, the amount of resources they'll allocate or the amount of tax dollars they think should go there or what the policy or laws should be might be in competition with other priorities that they value around zoning or tax use or schools or whatever. It doesn't mean that they don't have that value. But we make this assumption that the values that I hold sacred, the top one or two or three things that I maximize towards with my value set, are completely at odds with your value set. And that's what they find through an enormous body of research that they've done, is that that's not even close to true. It's just that those values were third, fourth, and fifth for that guy. And the ones they prioritized were third, fourth, fifth, and sixth for you. And therefore, it's really difficult for you to talk about things because what you're maximizing towards is just different than theirs. But you all value the same things. And he literally breaks it down into like 7 or 8 values that you're like, yeah, that kind of basically captures just about all of us. And there's some parallels to different faiths and different religions, and people who prioritize certain value sets tend to steer one way politically versus the other. But at the end of the day, the core values we all share are truly shared. They're just prioritized differently. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, I'll bet. That sounds like an interesting one. It makes me think of one of the ideas that I find a lot of value in is paying some attention to what you think your meta narrative is I guess the way that I've come to, I've heard it also, what is your worldview, different ways like that. But I think of it in terms of the meta narrative where we're doing all these little things every day, making decisions, doing it. What does it line up with? Is there a large story where this is ultimate truth? This is how I see the world. And because of that, everything else needs to align. It's almost like a strategic plan, right? So once you spend time focused on your mission, vision, and values, and you come up with a strategic plan, the plan, everything that you do needs to align with that mission, vision, and values. So is it even possible to come up with a strategic plan if you don't have mission, vision, and values? Because it's going to be, you're not tying it to anything. So if I have, it does it. And that is a different starting point for a lot of people. That meta narrative, as far as why am I here? That is people do have different ideas of that. And it starts with, you either believe the world was created or you believe it just popped into existence. And those two different beliefs have massively different down the road implications.
Yeah. Yeah. I think of what you're describing as, at least in my life, as I've worked through some of this, as like identifying misalignment that I have in myself. Like some of the biggest tensions I've ever struggled with, right? Some of the most extreme times of selfishness or extreme opposite end of that of selflessness stem from alignment or misalignment of this meta narrative you're describing, and some of the implications of What am I really here for? And how much conviction I have about that. And the degree to which you've explored any of that probably dramatically informs how you feel about the things that you're doing and how much conviction
Absolutely.
you have to go sit next to that guy again and nudge him in the ribs and say, what do you think about that this time? Like you just, that alignment piece is true for companies, to your point of mission, vision, values. And it's really helpful for individuals. And that in the retreat my wife and I did last week, I know we talked about it before we hopped on. One of the core things we did is sat down and stack rank values individually and then sit down and go, what are yours? And what do we share? And where are we different? And it was, we've been together 17 years. And it was really fascinating to explore. We have quite a few overlapping, and we have a couple that make absolute sense that we differ on. And it isn't necessarily about trying to change or perfectly align on all 5 of them, but awareness allows us to respect or understand at least why I'm acting one way or caring about something that she's not. How do you do that what are some of what guidance would you give to somebody who's just wrestling with their meta narrative, who maybe hears this and identifies that they might have some misalignment internally that's really causing some of the challenges that they're facing in their life? Like, how do you take this first couple steps forward if you recognize you'd like to sort that out?
Well, I think, first of all, I would say, what a great exercise that you and your wife are going through to go through that. That is just, that's gold star stuff. And as far as, it's, I think being willing to have conversation with people that you disagree with is, and actually liking it. Because I like it. I actually like arguing. And I've tried to change it from arguing to debating. Sometimes it still ends up being arguing, but usually arguing then is not constructive. And there was I have since I was little, I like to argue. I don't know if I can say this on the air, but there was a leader in a church that we grew up with I don't know, maybe I was 14, 15, and he referred to me as that argumentative little bastard. And I could take any position. Go ahead, tell me, here's the topic, what position you want me to take, and I can argue it until I'm blue in the face, and I love it. But the core mistake that I was making is I would get into these things just because I wanted to win. That was my only goal.
Yeah.
Was to just, and I knew I had won if you left crying or wanted to punch me in the face or something. I knew, okay, I'm winning.
I win.
I win. That's really all I care about. And at some point it dawned on me that that's really probably not the best way to go about life. Is, if you're going to get into debates, it should be something constructive where you learn something, they learn something, and you can make a positive contribution to it somehow. And I think that's a major part it's still a major part is being willing to engage and recognize that if it does start to get heated, back off. But somehow or another, we can't just not talk to each other.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers your question or not, but
I think it's a helpful step in the right direction. I think one of the characteristics of all people is a spectrum of disagreeableness or agreeableness. Your willingness to be disagreeable, and it's literally a psychological trait that somebody could analyze and say, oh, you're far more willing to be disagreeable than others, and other people you're far more willing to be agreeable. You would probably rank highly on the willing to be disagreeable spectrum. Like, that's just a characteristic that you've been comfortable with for a long time. A lot of people do not have that. They are never going to be that much more willing to be disagreeable. And so the only mechanism for somebody in that situation is like tactical, and to change the way you play the game, because you're going to enter disagreements with people in life. Mm-hmm. Like, it's inevitable part of the deal is tension and friction and disagreements, especially if you choose a partner with children. Like, it's just inevitable. But how you go about it is what you described as what changed for you. So how did you make that change from trying to win to what we were talking about earlier when we're trying to add the recipe to put together the recipe for the stew of a good question is figuring out what your intention was. How did you change the way you debated or played devil's advocate or were disagreeable so that it served in a better way?
Well, I don't know that I can put a finger on how I changed, because I'm not always 100% sure I have changed. I recognize a deep desire to change, but I'm not sure I always recognize whether or not I'm changing. But I can say I remember when it first became apparent that I didn't want to do that. And it was after being in a blow up argument with somebody that I was very happy with the outcome. I had clearly won and stomped this person emotionally into the ground. And so I was very pleased with myself until I envisioned being 100 feet up in the air and looking down at the situation and seeing myself doing that and saying, do I really want to be that person? And I didn't like that person that I saw. That's what I remember is, that's a bit ugly.
Yeah.
I don't really want to be that person. So how did I change? I'm not sure, but I think the first part of change is being aware and having a desire to do something different. And then the change is what it is. But if you're not aware of it or you don't care, then you're probably not changing at all.
I think that's a good observation. You had to have known you were doing something you wanted to change in order to start to figure out what the first steps might be in that direction. Yeah, as you were talking about that, it made me think like I have a couple friends who've been described as word bullies. They're just a better debater than everybody else. It's not necessarily that they're smarter, better, right. It's just that they're really good at the wordsmithing. They're good at words.
You can think on your feet faster than
process quickly, and they retain information well, and they can assault you with it all they want, and there's nothing you can do about it, and they're going to win.
Right.
But from the outside looking in, you're just kind of an asshole. Like, good job, neat. Like, that didn't help whatever you were trying to do, unless the goal was to feel better about yourself or win an argument today, which I guess gold star if that was the case.
Well, yeah. I mean, and that gets back to the prayer of St. Francis too, is that really who you want to be? Isn't the whole, if I want to be about making the world a better place and helping the people around, you can't do that if you're worried about just building yourself up all the time. I mean, it's just not going to work.
Yeah. Let's maybe, as we draw to a close here, let's maybe use that as a good wrap-up question. Who do you want to be?
The easy answer, I suppose, is I want to be the best version of myself. I think we're all put on this earth with certain gifts and responsibilities to use those gifts well. And I'd like to, I suppose, you think about epitaphs and everything else. I'd like my sons to feel like at the end of the day, I did that. I was the best version of myself. One of my favorite things, one of my sons said, I can't say that you're the best dad ever, but I can say that nobody ever tried harder. And that meant a lot to me. That's in the end, it's that effort to try to try to be whatever you're trying to be. And really, that's all we should be trying to do, is be the best version of ourselves. And so part of that is trying to be self-aware. Part of that is finding the areas that you want to grow in. Whatever it is that, I guess, whatever it is that God put on your plate.
Seems like one of the critical questions built into your answer there is for whom? Who do I want to be? Well, for whom? And you started to describe who you may want to be for your sons, and I suspect there's a different answer for Janine. I suspect there's a different answer for grandkids and friends and business partners, and I think that alone is an interesting distinction to focus on.
Well, and again, forgive me, but for going biblically, the idea is for, at the end of the day, God saying, "Well done, good and faithful servant." Mm. Ultimately, that's what you're after, because you really can't control what other people think about you. I mean, only to some degree. I know people who are great parents and have kids that don't appreciate it. Let's just say, and so there's only so much. At the end of the day, that would be pretty awesome for God to say, "Well done."
It seems like much of the Bible, most of the Bible, all of the Bible is an effort to explain what it would mean to earn that type of response. Because there's a recipe there. There's things that steer closer to that, and there's things that steer significantly further away from earning that type of acknowledgement. And it sure seems like one of the core themes of your focus in your life has been serving people as a pretty critical component to earn that type of answer. Is that accurate?
Well, I think that if we are trying to earn our way,
fair,
we're barking up the wrong tree. This is a heart issue. The way the Bible is constructed, I mean, there's a lot of things going on in the Bible, as you know, but I think in the end, a major part of the message is that there's this high bar that we can't reach. God's concerned about a heart. There's a verse in there that says, "What does God actually require of you?" And it says to walk humbly with your God and to love mercy and do justice. That's Old Testament. That's what it. So what does God expect? Hey, number one, walk humbly with God, and then be merciful, love justice, do justice. And so you can break that down and say, what does that mean? What does that mean to me? What does that mean, to everybody else? How do you go about that? But it's not prescriptive. There isn't a line. It's like being a good parent. There isn't a line that says, okay, you have to achieve these things. It's the law, God's law, and everything else primarily is a heart thing. It's the spirit of the law, not the actual laws themselves that God's primarily concerned with. I think it's a heart thing. Where's your heart at? Do you grieve over the same things God does? Do you love the same thing God does? If you're kind of trying to stay in that arena, I think you're going to be okay.
Thanks for sharing some wisdom with us today, Steve. Thanks for coming on. Appreciate it having you.
Erik, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It's been fun.
See you next week, everybody.
All right.